they know, and especially when you have to go to other cities for reporting, like when you go out to Chongqing, then they'll say, "Oh, you should look up this person," and having them uh, be able to invoke their name, like a name of a friend, helps open doors. Also, I think another thing to look at is there are a lot of Chinese who work within the system who want to divulge information to people to get it out, and these will include, for example, Chinese journalists and academics, and I think those are people that any reporter working in China should stay in touch with.
I'll add, Ed, that I think also for these investigative stories that we've done, it was really about leaving no stone unturned. So a lot of times while we were following the money trail, you come across so many names, so many addresses, and last year a lot of time was devoted to knocking on doors. I've been to a lot of different people's apartments and houses,
so literally knocking on doors.
Really knocking on doors. Hi, we're doing the story. We found your name on this. How do you know this person? Can you tell us what you know? And sometimes you get nobody opens the door, or they'll speak through the door to you, but sometimes we did get lucky in some cases. So, and after we do talk to that person, and we, I guess, meet them again and try to build their trust, which is, I guess, the most important thing about cultivating sources.
Interesting. Now, let's talk about social media, because that's turned into an alternative virtual way of sniffing out a story or even cultivating sources that way. What social media tools do you use, and do you have any rules of the road when using social media as investigative reporters?
Weibo obviously is really important because so many people are on it, and at the same time, I was gonna, when I was thinking about what to say at this panel, I think there's also unexpected sources of internet media. I don't know if it's social media, but for example, job ads. You talk to the companies that we're following, they'll be HR people or someone, the VP that used to be there that still his cell phone would work. That was really invaluable. LinkedIn, again, when we're looking at companies, is important because some of the LinkedIn profiles that we looked at might be a few years old, but we'll know that that person worked at the company when one of our characters was working there. And again, that was a really important source of finding people to talk to.
And I would say that in terms of monitoring Weibo, Weibo has really changed the landscape of reporting in Beijing, probably more than anything else in the last 10 years. And not only is it useful for keeping track of running news, if a train crash happens and what people are saying, but also even for the stories that touch on politics, on the very highest levels of politics, then things will filter out on Weibo, and if you're canny enough, you'll catch it. One thing that all of us missed, everyone in Beijing, was well before the Western press tied the murder of Haywood to Bo. It was out on Weibo. It appeared on Weibo in February when one Southern group journalist put out a Weibo message saying, "Oh, this Wang Lijun going to the Chengdu consulate is somehow related to the murder of Neil Haywood and the Bo family." And it was a Weibo message that sat there for a while. And there's so many rumors out there, so it's hard to sort of pick it out. But if your antenna is up, then you might be able to pick up something that then would lead to an investigative story. None of the Western journalists who ended up starting to break that story had seen that Weibo message or acted on it. They broke the story based on other means, but the Weibo message was out there.
We also found it quite good for building the narrative when we did the Eight Immortals story. And we were looking for the subsequent generations. It got harder and harder to find, and there were lots of great-grandchildren we couldn't find. But we had a break and discovered a Weibo account belonging to the great-granddaughter of Wang Jun, who was one of the founding fathers, big figure at Poly and CITIC. And she had an amazingly transparent life, that she loved to write about herself every day and her lifestyle, the business class lounges, and you could follow her life. And she'd post pictures of her great-grandfather, of her uncle, so also helped confirm a lot of the relationships just through that, but also you were able to really see someone's life in real time. It was kind of scary to watch.
Yeah. But when do you decide to make that jump? When you see something akin to Wang Lijun being in the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, and or see sort of the buzz and say, do you know what, I think there's something here. Do you rely on instinct, or when do you decide I'm going to devote some muscle and some effort and some time into this to find out if this is true or not?
I think partly it's, I mean, a small part of it is an instinct, but then there's so many things out there. It's really hard to. I think even someone with the best reportorial instincts might be a little confused if they try to figure out cold what to pursue. But I think that this is where your sources come in, where people you keep in touch with who know something about the system say, "Oh, I think that I saw this message." And a lot of times, like the most interesting Weibo messages are ones that, I mean, I'm not sitting there monitoring Weibo like constantly, but it's someone like a friend might say, "Oh, did you catch this? Like, you should take a look at this." And then I think that's when you decide whether or not to start pursuing something.
And Edward, it was interesting hearing you say Weibo as being such a game changer in the last 10 years of reporting in China, just a real game changer in the craft. There's been so much buzz recently about WeChat, and you made the quick reference to the Wenzhou train collision that was considered widely as the watershed moment, especially in terms of breaking news on Weibo. Will there be a watershed moment in terms of breaking news on WeChat? Do you use WeChat? Do you envision that as being a tool for investigative reporting?
Yeah, I do use Weixin. I haven't used it in reporting yet, so I'd be curious. Like, if other people at this conference have used it before, I'd be curious to hear how they use it. I'm not sure that it would. It hasn't gotten, in terms of the news value traction in China, it hasn't gotten the same following yet as Weibo in terms of discussion of social issues and then breaking news. It hasn't gotten to that degree yet. Although I could see I think you can send photos, for example, of events more quickly over Weixin, and it can be transmitted more quickly. So I could see how it could offer visual documentation quicker than Weibo.
Now, in all your investigative reporting work, is there ever the question in the back of your mind, this could be a state secret, or what's going to be the fallout from this? Now we're going to get into the second phase of the discussion, which is about the risks of doing this type of work in China.
Always, and I'm not aware. State secret can be defined at any time, I think, and made retroactive. I think what's important to do is to report transparently, honestly, in good faith. You're looking for information, you go about it in the correct way, you're not doing anything underhand. So, if there comes a time where somebody has a problem with what you're information trying to get, you have a perfectly clear conscience in saying this was a public document, this was a public company record, or this was, we got this from this government website. As Ed said, there's a huge amount of detail on some of those websites. Or official news coverage of funerals, weddings. I know David talks about going to graveyards to find leads for the Wen story. It's but everything. There's nothing underhand. It's up front, and when you have your story, you go and ask for a comment openly. I think that's the best way to deal with it.
I would add that talking about going back to them for comments, last year we really made every effort we could to reach everybody that we wrote about for a comment, including, for example, FedExing things to the address. If we couldn't reach to my phone, there was no other door, we'd, send FedExes or, again, knock on doors. We just made a lot of it, and I think that also made everything more transparent.
Right, and I agree that the state secrets thing is a very flexible term, and I don't. So I think to a degree you can't. If you were to keep that fear in your mind all the time, you wouldn't be able to operate in China because a lot of things you lay your hands on can be construed as state secrets, and we've seen a lot of overseas Chinese put into jail, on charges of having state secrets, even though they were just looking up financial records or even public financial records like. These guys are pointing out can be construed as state secrets. So, so it's something that we keep in mind, but it would be too much of a hindrance if we dwell too much on it because of the flexible definition. And I have to say, one thing that has concerned me recently isn't just the fact that obviously it's much more egregious in China, but then in the U.S. you also see the Obama administration starting to use some of the same type of strategy in terms of the way they classify information and then going after journalists for trying to get classified information, like in the case of this recent Fox News reporter. So it's happening in governments around the world.
But more in the working conditions, as you mentioned, journalists in China, in covering this story and covering sensitive topics, have been detained We have seen journalists expelled, or Melissa K. Chang, the expulsion of her, the Al Jazeera correspondent in Beijing, visas withheld. Your thoughts on the working conditions for foreign correspondents in China the last 12 months and your personal experience working as a journalist in China?
It has gotten tighter for journalists. I'll have to say, in the New York Times experience, they have taken retribution against us, as they have with Bloomberg for the Wen Jiabao stories. One thing they did not do was expel David Barboza, who did the reporting on the story. And people have been surprised about that. Ching Ching was just asking me why he wasn't expelled. And I think that they were canny enough to calibrate their reaction so that they wouldn't make a journalistic martyr out of him. And then if they did take that action, they would make the Wen family look even worse than they already did. So then what they've done is they've held up visas of reporters who are supposed to be working in bureaus. So we've had reporters leave Beijing, as they would naturally do after rotating out, but our bureau's not at full strength right now because reporters who are supposed to come in can't get their visas to work there. And also they've blocked their websites. So I know in David's case, they've stepped up monitoring or surveillance of both what he does and what his researcher does. So he's being a little bit more careful right now about what kinds of stories he's going after, and I think he's going to see where this leads in the next few months.
Bloomberg has suffered retribution as well.
There were obviously reactions to what we did, and we've had to try and deal with those as best we can as a company. But I mean, from my point of view, always concerned about the journalists most, and Ed's right. I mean, it's not just us, but all foreign media organizations have had big problems getting visas in recent months. Last year was obviously a transition year, so there was all kind of factional rumors. Everyone was more jumpy than perhaps usual. Now we have a government firmly set under Xi's leadership. It will be interesting to see how that affects the policy, whether they're prepared to relax a little bit. Certainly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has communicated its message that, it expects journalists to behave when they are in the country.
In terms of retribution, Bloomberg data terminal sales have been affected in China?
I can't talk about the business side. I don't know, but certainly the website was taken down as was the New York Times, and that was blocked. But I can't talk about the business side.
Okay, let's talk about the hacking, because a number of journalists' email accounts have been hacked in China. Whether or not your individual accounts have been hacked or colleagues, how do you protect your account while working on a story? How do you protect yourself digitally?
Well, that's probably not something we should talk about in a public forum. But
Fair enough.
And I know it's being live streamed and recorded. So, but I'll say that people usually say if you're using Gmail these days, you should take two-step verification. Like that's an easy initial step to take. But then there's various other things to do. And some people have started using tools like Silent Circle or other programs like that. In terms of the emails being hacked, that's not a new thing. Like that's been going on for years, and I think there's a conflation of there's been a conflation in people's minds in the last few months of simple hacking of an email account versus hacking an entire network, like a company's network.